Welcome to True Crime Case Files. In today's episode, we delve into a chilling case that has haunted the outskirts of Evansville, Indiana for decades. On a cold March morning in 1991, a runaway teen's life came to a tragic and mysterious end inside a desolate freight train car. Was it murder or something even more complex? Join us as we investigate the case of Sheila Tork. In the early spring of 1991, as the Gulf War came to a close and the airwaves were filled with the sounds of Whitney Houston's All the Man That I Need, the streets of Evansville, Indiana, held a story far removed from the world stage. Sheila Tork, a 15-year-old girl, found herself caught in the underbelly of this small Midwestern city, a place where the echoes of industry once thrived. A former student at Benjamin Boss High School, Sheila had abandoned her education 5 months prior, succumbing to the grips of drug and alcohol addiction. Sheila's life before her descent was marked by an interest in the arts, with dreams of painting canvases that would express her inner world, much like the celebrated works of Georgia O'Keeffe, which were on exhibit at the Indianapolis Museum of Art that year. Her family life, however, was far from picturesque. Sheila was the daughter of Francis Delano Tork, a 45-year-old widower whose once prosperous life as a local business owner had crumbled into destitution and alcoholism. A story perhaps not unfamiliar to viewers of the era's popular TV drama Dallas, which depicted the trials of a wealthy Texas family. The Tork household, now a dilapidated structure on the edge of Evansville, had seen better days. Child services had been called to their address more times than the local postman, with neighbors whispering concerns of neglect. Sheila's personality, a blend of youthful exuberance and a weariness beyond her years, had begun to wane as her dreams were overshadowed by the harsh reality of her existence. In the days leading up to her untimely death, Sheila spoke of change. Friends recalled conversations, often held in the dimly lit corners of the arcade bar, where Sheila shared her longing to escape the clutches of her addictions and to rediscover the dreams she once held dear. Little did they know that these dreams would soon be extinguished, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt the community for years to come. On the morning of March 7, 1991, as the citizens of Evansville, Indiana, were waking to a typical cold and dreary day, a grim discovery was made that would send a ripple of shock through the community. It was a time when the nation's attention was captured by the winding down of Operation Desert Storm, and CNN broadcasts were filled with images of troops returning home to parades and fanfare. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of Evansville, the stark reality of a life lost too soon was unfolding. At approximately 7:35 a.m., Tom Briggs, a rail worker with 2 decades under his belt, stepped into a scene that starkly contrasted the hopeful news stories of the day. Inside a long-abandoned freight train car on the outskirts of town, a car that had once carried the industrial lifeblood of a bustling economy, lay the body of Sheila Tork. The train car, covered in graffiti, was a known haunt for the homeless seeking shelter from the biting Indiana winter, now made infamous as the final resting place of a young girl. Tom, a man not easily shaken, found his composure slipping away at the sight of Sheila's lifeless form. Her body was positioned in a way that suggested she had not simply laid down to rest. Next to her, an inconspicuous revolver lay on the cold, metal floor. The presence of the firearm raised immediate questions about the circumstances of her death. Without hesitation, Tom reported the discovery to the Evansville Police Department. His voice, usually steady and assured, betrayed a sense of urgency as he described the scene to the dispatcher. The weather that day, a typical Midwestern mix of overcast skies and a chill that seeped into the bones, seemed to mirror the somber task at hand. As the first responders made their way to the location, the local community was still oblivious to the tragedy that had occurred, with households tuned into the familiar jingles of morning commercials on Wiki Radio, unaware that one of their own had met such a tragic fate. The Evansville Police Department, a force accustomed to the quiet ebb and flow of small-town crime, was promptly jolted into action on the morning of March 7, 1991. The call from Tom Briggs came in just as the city was beginning to stir, its residents preparing for another workday, perhaps stopping by a local donut bank for a quick breakfast. The popular chain where discussions often centered around the latest news from CNN or the Indianapolis Star. Detective Sarah Grisel and her partner, Detective Kevin Newberger, veterans of the force, arrived on the scene within minutes of the call. Their breaths visible in the frigid air, they approached the dilapidated freight car with a sense of grim determination. The detectives, though experienced, could not help but feel the weight of the situation. The loss of a young life always carried a unique heaviness. The scene that greeted them was a stark tableau of tragedy. Sheila Tork's body lay still against the cold metal floor, the gun beside her a silent sentinel to the final moments of her life. The lack of apparent struggle or disarray suggested a moment of sudden violence, whether self-inflicted or by another's hand. The detectives set to work, cordoning off the area with the familiar yellow tape that signified a boundary between the everyday world and a scene of potential crime. With methodical precision, they collected evidence, dusting for fingerprints that might reveal a visitor to the car other than Sheila herself. Forensics technicians snapped photographs, documenting every detail of the scene, from the position of the body to the spent shell casing that lay nearby. Detective Grisel, her face a mask of concentration, made notes on a pad that she carried, a pad that had seen the stories of countless other victims. As they worked, the detectives were keenly aware of the paradoxical nature of their task, employing the latest in crime scene investigation techniques, akin to those popularized on the new hit TV series Law and Order. While surrounded by the decay of a bygone industrial era, it was a grim reminder that progress and despair often walked hand in hand. In the immediate aftermath of the discovery of Sheila Tork's body, the Evansville Police Department focused its attention on a figure close to the victim, her father, Francis Delano Tork. At 45 years old, Francis's narrative was one marred by loss and decline. Once the proprietor of a modest but thriving hardware store, a local fixture as reliable as the craftsman tools it sold, Francis's life had taken a downturn following his wife's death and the subsequent collapse of his business. A downturn that mirrored the nation's recessionary woes, frequently headlined in the Wall Street Journal. Francis, whose relationship with Sheila had been fraught with complications, was known to have a volatile temperament. Reports to Child Services had painted a picture of a household where neglect and discord were the norm, not unlike the troubled domestic scenes depicted in the contemporary TV drama Twin Peaks. His dreams, once centered on family and financial success, had dissipated into the haze of alcoholism. When questioned by detectives Grisel and Neuberger, Francis's demeanor oscillated between sorrow and anger, his emotions as raw as the vocals of Pearl Jam's Alive, a chart-topping hit at the time. He vehemently denied any involvement in his daughter's death, his protestations underscored by slurred words and the scent of whiskey that seemed to cling to his clothes like a second skin. The interrogation, held in the stark confines of an interview room at the police station, a room with walls as bare as the shelves of his former store, yielded no confession, nor any tangible link to the crime. Francis's alibi for the night in question was shaky, built on the uncorroborated claims of barflies at local dives like Lamasco Bar. The police, though skeptical of his innocence, were forced to concede that without concrete evidence, Francis Tork remained a suspect in name only. As the investigation into Sheila Tork's untimely death progressed, the Evansville Police Department turned their scrutiny to Harry Clampers, an 18-year-old with a reputation that cast a long shadow. Harry, Sheila's older boyfriend, was known in the community for his tempestuous nature and his influence on Sheila's descent into the world of substance abuse. Witnesses likened his unpredictable mood swings to the volatile stock market fluctuations that dominated the headlines of the New York Times in the early 90s. Clampers, a high school acquaintance of Sheila's, had dropped out and was working odd jobs, often seen behind the counters of fast food joints like Rally's, flipping burgers and filling orders with a detached air. His dreams of escaping Evansville's confines were as faded as the denim jacket he wore, a garment that seemed emblematic of his stalled ambitions. The police investigation revealed that Harry was the one who had introduced Sheila to the darker corners of Evansville's nightlife, where drugs and alcohol flowed as freely as the waters of the Ohio River. Friends and acquaintances whispered about the couple's tumultuous relationship, suggesting a dynamic fraught with control and dependency, not unlike the themes explored in Madonna's Rescue Me, a hit song blaring from the speakers of downtown clubs. During his interrogation, Harry's demeanor swung like a pendulum between cooperative and confrontational. His answers were laced with a bitterness that suggested resentment, yet he maintained his innocence with a calm that bordered on defiance. His alibi for the night Sheila died was vague. He claimed to have been at a friend's house, engrossed in a marathon of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, an alibi as flimsy as the sitcom's laugh track. Despite the circumstantial evidence and the motive that seemed to lurk beneath the surface of Harry's relationship with Sheila, the police were unable to move beyond speculation. Harry Clampers remained a free man, his name etched in the case file as a suspect, but with no charges to bear. On a brisk March morning in 1991, as Evansville residents shuffled through their routines against a backdrop of lingering winter chill, a new development emerged in the investigation of Sheila Tork's death. It was March 15th, a day when the local news cycle was dominated by the NCAA basketball tournament buzz and the latest episode of America's Most Wanted, which citizens watched in hopes of catching a glimpse of justice in action. The new evidence surfaced unexpectedly when a local shopkeeper, reviewing security tapes from the night prior to Sheila's body being discovered, contacted the authorities. The grainy footage revealed the teen engaged in what appeared to be a heated exchange outside the corner store, a place where neon signs of Coca-Cola flickered and locals stopped in for their copies of the Evansville Courier and Press. Detectives Grisel and Newberger arrived at the shop, nestled between the rows of red brick buildings that line Main Street, to collect the VHS tape. The footage was far from definitive, yet it offered a time-stamped glimpse into Sheila's last known interactions. The detectives watched intently as the on-screen Sheila argued with a shadowy figure, too indistinct to identify, before the two disappeared from the camera's view. The shopkeeper, a man who prided himself on knowing the regulars by their choice of cigarette brand, from Marlboro to Camel, could not provide further insight into the identity of the person in the footage. The police were left with the task of enhancing the video, a process that seemed more aligned with the high-tech crime-solving depicted on Quantum Leap than the reality of their analog resources. Despite the limitations, the new evidence reinvigorated the investigation. It was a lead, albeit a tenuous one, in a case that had thus far offered few answers. As the detectives returned to the precinct, the weight of the unsolved case hung over them, a silent partner in their pursuit of the truth. The investigation's focus shifted when the police considered a third suspect, Maria Hackelberg, a 67-year-old woman whose life on the margins of society had left her with a fragile grasp on reality. Maria, who suffered from dementia, was an unlikely suspect, but her proximity to Sheila in the days leading up to the teenager's death could not be overlooked. She had been sharing the abandoned freight car with Sheila, seeking refuge from the unforgiving Indiana winter, much like the characters in John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, a novel that resonated with the plight of the downtrodden during the Dust Bowl, and now echoed in the modern-day struggles of Evansville's homeless. Maria, a transient figure often spotted wandering near the Greyhound bus station, clutching a tattered copy of the Evansville Courier and Press, harbored dreams of reuniting with family members she could no longer clearly recall. Her interrogation by the police was a delicate affair. Her answers meandered through the fog of her memory, touching on fragmented recollections of her past and disjointed observations of her life with Sheila. The interrogation room, with its stark fluorescent lighting reminiscent of the harsh glare in a scene from the contemporary courtroom drama, L.A. Law, did little to ease Maria's disorientation. Her responses, when coherent, suggested no malice towards Sheila. Instead, they painted a picture of two lives intersecting briefly in mutual hardship, their conversations a blend of Maria's disjointed memories and Sheila's dreams of a future that would never come to pass. Detectives Grisel and Newberger found themselves at a crossroads. The evidence against Maria was circumstantial at best, her motive unclear. The revolver found at the scene was unregistered, its origins as mysterious as the final hours of Sheila's life. With no clear answers, the investigation into Maria Hackelberg's involvement stalled, leaving the police to wonder if the key to solving Sheila's death lay buried within the confused mind of a woman who had already lost so much to the ravages of time. As the investigation into Sheila Tork's death deepened, the Evansville Police Department faced the daunting task of piecing together a puzzle with too many missing parts. It was March of 1991, and the world's focus was on the aftermath of the Gulf War, with newspapers like USA Today recounting tales of heroism. Yet, on the local front, a more personal story was unfolding, one that would not find its way into the annals of heroism, but rather into the somber archives of unresolved tragedies. The police had exhausted their leads. Maria Hackelberg, the elderly homeless woman with dementia, remained the last known associate of Sheila. Yet the evidence to conclusively name her as the perpetrator was as elusive as the final episodes of the hit series Dallas, leaving viewers in suspense. Maria's erratic behavior and presence at the crime scene offered a narrative thread, but it was one frayed by her mental state and lack of motive. The gun found beside Sheila, a revolver of a make and model that could have been purchased at any sporting goods store, like the local Gander Mountain, yielded no fingerprints, and its ownership remained a mystery. The gunshot wound, with its ambiguous trajectory, left open the question of whether Sheila's death was the result of foul play or a tragic act of self-harm. The detectives, with their years of experience and dedication to the job, felt the sting of frustration. They had hoped for a breakthrough akin to the sudden plot twists in the crime novels that lined the shelves of the bookbroker, a popular local used bookstore. Instead, they were met with dead ends. In the absence of definitive evidence, the case grew cold, and the community was left to speculate. Rumors circulated, filling the void left by the lack of facts. Was it murder, or had Sheila's troubled life led her to a desperate act? The truth remained shrouded in mystery, as obscured as the motives behind the fall of the Berlin Wall just over a year prior, a symbol of clarity and resolution that, in this case, remained painfully out of reach. Despite the uncertainty shrouding Sheila Tork's death, the Evansville Police Department felt compelled to act. It was late March 1991, a time when the local community was still grappling with the chilling discovery, much like the rest of the world was wrestling with the sudden dissolution of the Soviet Union. A topic that dominated the headlines of Time magazine. On March 22nd, under a sky that was a patchwork of gray, indicative of the seasonal transition from winter to spring, the police made the decision to arrest Maria Hackelberg. The evidence against her was circumstantial at best, based more on her proximity to Sheila and her confused state than any concrete proof. The arrest was as unexpected as the upset in the NCAA tournament when Duke's basketball team stunned UNLV, and it sent ripples of disbelief through the streets of Evansville. Maria, bewildered and frail, was taken into custody outside the freight car that had served as her makeshift home. Her reaction to the arrest was one of confusion. She seemed as unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation as the public was in understanding the rapid changes in Eastern Europe. The police, despite their reservations, proceeded with the protocols, their actions feeling as mechanical as the motions of the Game Boy, the popular handheld gaming device of the time, providing a distraction for some from the weightier issues of the day. As news of the arrest spread, the public's reaction was mixed. Some felt a sense of relief that an arrest had been made, while others questioned the validity of the charges against a vulnerable, elderly woman. Sheila's family, still reeling from their loss, faced the arrest with a complex mixture of hope for justice and the gnawing fear of its absence. The case, which had started as a straightforward investigation, had taken on the convoluted twists and turns of an episode of Twin Peaks, the surreal television drama that had viewers questioning what was real and what was not. Maria's arrest was a tangible step, but it did little to dispel the cloud of uncertainty that hung over the question of what had truly happened to Sheila Tork on that cold March day. In the courtroom of Evansville, as the winter of 1991 thawed into a hesitant spring, the trial of Maria Hackelberg for the death of Sheila Tork commenced. The prosecution was led by Elaine Richardson, 38, a prosecutor whose reputation for tenacity rivaled that of the Gulf War's General Norman Schwarzkopf, as featured in Time magazine. Her counterpart, defense attorney Gus Havendale, 52, possessed the calm demeanor of a man who had witnessed the ebb and flow of justice like the daily fluctuations in the Dow Jones, a subject of much discussion during those post-recession months. Richardson presented a case built on circumstantial evidence, weaving a narrative that sought to convince the jury of Maria's guilt. She pointed to the proximity of Maria to Sheila in the freight car and her known presence at the scene. The defense, however, painted Maria as a victim of her circumstances, a woman whose mental health issues were as neglected as the city's fading industrial sector, which had once been the pride of Evansville. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom often fell silent, save for the rustling of newspapers as reporters from the Evansville Courier and Press scribbled notes for a public hungry for updates. Sheila's family sat in the gallery, their expressions a mix of hope and despair, much like the faces of families featured on Unsolved Mysteries, seeking closure for their loved ones. The verdict, when it came, was met with a stunned silence. Maria Hackelberg was found innocent, the jury unconvinced beyond a reasonable doubt of her guilt. The courtroom, filled with the tension of a nation that had watched the Anita Hill testimony just months prior, now bore witness to another form of unresolved drama. The outcome left Sheila's family grappling with a verdict that felt like a denial of justice, their grief as palpable as the collective sorrow for the recently deceased basketball star, Hank Gathers. The community, too, was left to wonder about the efficacy of a system that seemed to provide more questions than answers. The verdict's effect was as divisive as the opinions on the newly fought Gulf War. Some felt justice had been served, while others saw a failure in the system. In the wake of the trial that concluded with Maria Hackelberg's acquittal, the fabric of Evansville, Indiana, was forever altered. The year 1991 marched on, with the local airwaves gradually shifting focus from the Gulf War's end to the anticipation of Michael Jordan leading the Chicago Bulls to NBA glory. Yet, for those touched by the tragedy of Sheila Tork, life was irrevocably stuck on that cold March day. Frances Delano Tork, once a name associated with a reputable local business, faded further into obscurity, his image now tied to the tragic narrative of his daughter's death. The few remaining friends who frequented his company saw a man increasingly lost to the numbing embrace of alcohol, seeking solace in the bottom of a bottle of Old Crow, a far cry from the aspirations he once held. Harry Clampers, the young man with the tumultuous past, in the shadow of suspicion ever looming over him, left Evansville. His departure was as silent as the questions that remained unanswered. Rumors circulated that he had drifted west, chasing the ghost of freedom on the historic Route 66, but his exact whereabouts became the stuff of local lore, as elusive as the truth behind Sheila's demise. Maria Hackelberg, the elderly woman whose innocence had been declared in the court of law but not in the court of public opinion, continued to wander the streets. Her reality, one marred by the confusion of dementia, was now compounded by the whispers that followed her every step. The freight train car that had been her refuge became a place she could no longer visit, a stark reminder of the dark chapter she had unwittingly become a part of. Detectives Grisel and Newberger returned to their duties, the specter of the unsolved case casting a long shadow over their careers. They faced new crimes and sought justice for other victims, but the file marked Torque remained within reach, a case that could neither be closed nor forgotten. Sheila's family, particularly her younger siblings who had looked up to her as a beacon of potential, grappled with a reality that offered no closure. They moved through their days with a resilience born of necessity, their loss a silent companion. The community, too, remembered Sheila in hushed tones, her story a cautionary tale that underscored the fragility of youth and the elusive nature of truth. As Evansville faced the dawn of a new year, the echoes of Sheila's life continued to resonate, her dreams and the mystery of her death woven into the town's history, as indelible as the changing seasons of the Midwest. The case of Sheila Torque remains a chilling enigma, a story of a young life cut short and a justice system that left more questions than answers. In the cold March of 1991, a tragedy unfolded that would leave an indelible Kevin on the town of Evansville, Indiana, a reminder that sometimes the line between truth and uncertainty is as thin and as fragile as the silence of an empty freight train car. Thank you for joining us on True Crime Case Files. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep seeking the truth. Hey, true crime case solvers, interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe, true crime case solvers.